Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rümeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, if an op-ed, which, but that's exactly, in fact.
She was a Turkish graduate student at Tufts University, committed to her academic pursuits and eager to be part of the global exchange of ideas that American institutions are so often praised for. Her only misstep, if one can even call it that, was exercising a right that countless students take for granted. She co-authored an opinion piece in the university's newspaper. This article was not a call to violence, nor was it an attempt to undermine the nation's security. It was an expression of thought, a contribution to the ongoing dialogue that universities are supposed to encourage. Yet that single act of expression set off a chain of events that turned her life into a nightmare. The State Department, under the discretionary authority of Secretary Marco Rubio, approved the revocation of her student visa. No crime had been committed, no violation proven, and no evidence presented that she posed any threat.
In fact, what happened? The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always...
The most astonishing part of Rümeysa Öztürk's case is not just that her visa was revoked, but that even within the government itself, officials recognized there was no legitimate basis for the action. The State Department's own internal memo made it clear that there was insufficient evidence to justify taking away her student status. It stated plainly that she had not engaged in any activity that could be considered a threat to national security, nor had she violated any of the conditions that should trigger such a drastic measure. Despite this acknowledgement, her visa was revoked under the discretionary authority of the Secretary of State, suggesting that the decision was less about law and more about silencing an inconvenient voice. The inconsistency between the official findings and the actions taken against her demonstrates how fragile due process can become when power is exercised without accountability. What adds to the seriousness of this matter is the fact that a federal court later intervened and ordered her release.
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr. Secretary,
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
Secretary Rubio, I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. and suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street, and you have multiple jobs. Apparently, you're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job. Who snatches her off the street?
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask
and we're
you
going to
about
keep
the
doing
national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because
During the congressional questioning, one example stood out: a white Afrikaner named Charles Kleinhaus, who had publicly tweeted that Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group. His words were openly hateful, discriminatory, and harmful, yet he was granted refugee status under the same administration that punished Otterk for nothing more than an academic op-ed. The contrast between these two cases is impossible to ignore. On one hand, a graduate student who exercised free thought in a school newspaper was arrested, imprisoned, and nearly deported. On the other hand, an individual who spread blatant hate speech was welcomed into the country under a protected status. The message this sends is not one of justice or consistent law enforcement, but of selective enforcement based on political convenience and bias. This contradiction cuts deep into the credibility of the system. If the government truly believed that free speech was a privilege tied to visas, then someone openly promoting hatred and targeting an entire religious group should have been at the top of the list for exclusion. Instead, the individual was given protection, while a student who posed no threat was dragged into custody. The selective nature of these decisions raises troubling questions about the real motivations behind them. Was Otterk targeted because her views clashed with those in power? Was the refugee applicant accepted because his views aligned more closely with a narrative that some political figures were willing to tolerate or even quietly endorse? These are not comfortable questions, but they reveal the uneven ground on which freedom of expression is being decided. For international students and immigrants, the lesson is chilling.
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law
accurate?
student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the Supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
she wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
You reclaiming my time. You revoked her student visa because she wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
It's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person to enter the United States. That's a totally different process.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
You revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time is expired.
That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize Ranking Member Meeks for a closing statement.